Chemotherapy can lead to granulocytopenia. Some of you are going to become DM oncology shortly. So what are the drugs that we commonly use? Basically there are some early colony stimulating factors, some of them are called late colony stimulating. IL-1, IL-3 stem cell factor are early, whereas IL-6, IL-11, GM-CSF, erythropoietin, thrombopoietin, they are all basically called lineage specific late acting stimulating agents of the bone marrow is what you need to basically remember. GM-CSF is also called sargamastin and G-CSF is filgrastim, as all of you know very well. Diabetic foot care. So do you think diabetes by itself is a super specialty? It can be. Let me tell you, even though my father I treat diabetes, the son being a physician, still he says, why don't you take me to a specialized diabetic care unit? I say that they treat the same thing there. They will give you little printout, patient education, this and collect 1,000 rupees extra from you, and unnecessarily they will do ECG and echo and too many things which are not required. Your heart is functioning. Please let me vouch. No, still I want to go to that diabetic center. So you can, instead of doing DM, cardiology and all, you can start a hair growth center. You are the best person, happy individual. All bald men will stand in a queue like the shining islands. So you can run a very good practice. So, but let me tell you, doctor, diabetic foot is a challenge in itself. In fact, it is almost treated like a specialty in itself. Why patients with diabetes have this diabetic foot as a problem? Neuropathy and poor wound healing, ischemia, insensitivity, infection, and always diabetic foot. Unless you lean forward, touch the dorsalis pedis and feel it, the feet of the patient, your examination of the diabetes is not complete, because diabetes with atherosclerosis can lead to development of the peripheral vascular disease, which you don't need even an ultrasound probe also, doctor. Feeling the dorsalis pedis make you to know about the state of his arterial system in a patient of diabetes, which is a minimum investigation that you need to do. Basically, diabetic complications can be divided into microangiopathic and macroangiopathic. Now what are microangiopathic? Retinopathy, nephropathy, neuropathy and diabetic foot, they are all very important. Microangiopathic complications is what you need to remember. Now let us talk about the type 1 diabetes versus that of the type 2 diabetes. How many of you have seen two sisters, both of them presenting with DKA? Very rare, because family history is not really that important in the case of the type 1 diabetes. How many of you have seen your, I still remember, one of our professor of cardiology, his another brother is a surgeon and one brother is orthopedician. So they were all heading the 3 different departments. All the 3 were actually having diabetes. So after 40, type 2 diabetes, there the history is important. Family history will have a relevance. That is a very important carry home message. And type 1 and 2, what is one single point by which they both differ? Ketoacidosis is more often a complication of type 1 rather than that of the type 2. Does not mean that type 2 doesn't show. If a type 2 patient shows ketoacidosis, what is the most important that you have to evaluate in a 60-year-old individual, doctor? Sometimes acute MI. In a type 2 diabetes present itself with decay. CVA in a type 2 diabetes present itself with decay, or a severe pneumonia in a type 2 diabetes can present with decay. So always decay in the type 2 diabetes has got a precipitating factor, whereas in type 1 diabetes it is the rule of the game that decay is the one which is a definitely attendant complication. Now where do you come across islet cell antibodies is an important question, more often in type 1 diabetes. Against which antibodies they are called? They are called glutamic acid decarboxylase, GAD antibodies are the ones which we come across in type 1 diabetes. Type 1 people also have the other autoimmune pathologies, just like the Graves, Hashimoto's, Edison's, they are all associated. HLA, DR3, DR4, DQ, 95% of the patients will show the positivity of these things is what I like to underscore. Now do you think there is a discrepancy in our thinking? We said that genetic susceptibility is more common in type 2, but we are talking about DLA association, the HLA association with type 1. Genetic predisposition means family history. Family history is more often in type 2, but HLA association, autoimmunity, antibodies against islets, DKA, they are all more common in the type 1 is what we need to be remembered. Now, which infections can also cause an infection of the heart? Lyme disease, viral myocarditis, infectious mononucleosis, chlamydia, CMV, they are all the importantly notorious infections which can have an affliction to the heart. In diphtheria, you have got a diphtheritic cardiomyopathy which can occur. HIV also leads to development of cardiac involvement. Can you give me what is the most important HIV associated cardiac problem, doctor? HIV can cause coronary vasculitis. So, I still remember the patient of 34 years old, young individual, presenting with acute MI. There is no hypertriglyceridemia, there is no family history, there is no thrombophilic state like protein C, protein S deficiency which is predisposing. HIV serology was positive. So, HIV serology, seropositivity predisposes to coronary vasculitis which leads to development of acute MI is very much a possibility. Similarly, HIV also can lead to pericardial effusion is another important thing that we need to remember. Now, let us go to the next question. CSF with normal glucose, increased protein, marked lymphocytosis. 80% of exam will contain only this kind of questions, doctor. You should not leave them at all. You should correctly answer it. That is the purpose of preparation. So, in the case of pyogenic meningitis, you find the mononuclear PMNs which will be predominating. Viral meningitis, glucose is normal, protein is slightly increased, but lymphocytic pleocytosis will be there. And in the case of the TBM, typically lymphocytosis which is predominant with an increased amount of protein, that is a very important combination. Some regimes and certain neoplasms, let us be very sure about. CHOP. What is the acronym CHOP stands for, doctor? C for cytoxin and H for adriamycin, O for vincristine, oncovin, and P for prednisolone is the one which is used for the management of the non-Hodgkin's lymphoma is what need to be remembered. Now, what is the future entrance exam question? What is R-CHOP? R stands for what? Rituximab is the one which is the monoclonal antibody which is added to this CHOP regime, and rituximab will blocks the CD20 receptor, and that is the reason it helps a lot in the management of the non-Hodgkin's lymphoma where abnormal B lymphocytes are the ones which are being taken care by giving this rituximab is what need to be remembered. Then in Hodgkin's lymphoma, what are the regimes which are available? ABVD regime, MOP regime and Biacop regime are the various ones. ABVD is A for doxorubicin, adriamycin otherwise, bleomycin B, vinblastine and dacarbazine are the ones which are used, and mecloridamine, vincristine, procarbazine, prednisolone is MOP. Then what is Biacop? Especially when advanced Hodgkin's is there, then Biacop regime is the one which is typically used. It is more extensive because if you give Biacop compared to that of the MOP regime, bone marrow suppression will be more. Hence you require GM-CSF to be administered to the patient who is receiving Biacop regime. Hence Biacop relatively is costlier than that of the MOP regime. What does Biacop basically contain? It has got cyclophosphamide, adriamycin, etoposide, oncovin, bleomycin, procarbazine, prednisolone. They are all the part of the Biacop regime which is given in more advanced cases of Hodgkin's disease, that is in the stage 3 and stage 4 is what need to be fundamentally remembered. Hyperthyroidism can cause both T3, T4 elevated, sometimes only T4, only T3 elevated. Why there will be a only T3 elevated hyperthyroid state? Probably something is causing more peripheral conversion of T4 to T3. That is the one which is responsible. So there is a reason, doctor, primary T3 hyperthyroidism is a state where you have those individuals who are having a borderline iodine intake and TSH is decreased, but T3 is elevated, but T4 is still normal. Now what is the cause for only T4 toxicosis to happen? Suppose if the individual is taking excessive iodine, all that surplus will cause more of T4 to become produced. So borderline iodine uptake is T3 thyrotoxicosis, excessive iodine uptake is underlying cause for the T4 toxicosis is what need to be remembered. Now let us take up our most favorite topic, cardiac auscultation, which you have to be already your pioneers, because at least in our days we used to act that we listened S3, we palpated S1, but nowadays you are much more evidence based students. Unless you listen, you don't say it is S2 or S1. Unless you palpate, you don't say it is S3 or S4. So let us talk about it, doctor. Some sounds which are additional sounds other than S1, S2, they are diastolic, some of them are systolic. If you know what is the underlying pathophysiology of why that sound is being listened or felt, you can understand why it is diastolic or systolic. Opening snap is diastolic. Where do you listen that opening snap? Mitral stenosis, you listen. The moment mitral valves open, what will happen? Blood flows from left atrium into left ventricle, hence it is a phase of diastole of the ventricle. So opening snap is diastolic. Then S3 and S4. Why does S4 happen? When the atria contracts and pushes the blood into the ventricle, and if the ventricle is non-compliant, for example, I have hypertension for 10 years, my ventricular myocardium has become less elastic. So when the blood pumps into the ventricle in the last 1/3 of the ventricular diastole, it creates that rumbling which leads to development of S4 gallop, which is also a diastolic event in the last 1/3 of the diastole. Similarly, the pericardial knock that we come across also occurs when the heart is getting filled, so diastolic event. Then how about the systolic sounds? Clicks are what you listen typically at the time of systole when the heart is pumping out the blood is what need to be remembered. Clicks are those short high pitched sounds that are commonly heard, and typically if there is a click, does it indicate anything? Let us say you heard a ejection systolic click. Does it indicate anything? It indicates that the pathology lies at the level of the valve. See, suppose if there is any stenosis of aortic valve, where can the stenosis can exist, or pulmonary stenosis if it is there? It can be subaortic, aortic valvular level, supravalvular level. Click is heard only if the stenosis is at the level of the valve. So presence of the click is an indication of the underlying pathology for the obstruction of the outflow to be valvular in origin is what we need to basically remember. So the opening snap is the one which you typically listen as a diastolic sound, and clicks are often the systolic sounds. Now, do you listen this click only when systole has just started, or even in the mid systolic phase also you can listen? Mitral regurgitation with mitral valve prolapse leads to a mid systolic click. Why? Because what is the cause for the click in the case of, what is the problem why the mitral regurgitation is happening in mitral valve prolapse, doctor? Normally mitral valves are expected to close when the heart is pumping the blood out systole, but they are prolapsing, and that prolapse is causing that pop out sound of click. So this prolapse does not occur until it is the middle part of the systole. So there is a reason a mid systolic click is more often a feature of a mitral valve prolapse with a mitral regurgitation is what we need to remember. Now the question is, can you listen only the MVP click without listening murmur, or can the murmur will be heard without listening the click of MVP, or both need to be there together? There can be a click without murmur of MR in a case of MVP. So MVP leads to the click even without murmur. Murmur occurs only when the mitral regurgitation in MVP is significant enough, is what we need to basically remember. So typically an ejection click is the one which is the early systolic sound, not mid systolic. Typically when there is an abrupt halting of either aortic or pulmonary valve, you listen the click. So between S1 and S2 is called as, S1 is because of the closure of mitral and AV valves, and S2 is because of the closure of the aortic pulmonary. So after closure of the mitral valve, what will happen? Systole happens. So between S1 and S2 it is called systole. between S2 and S1 is called the diastole. Opening snap is a diastolic sound, so it is heard after the S2. And S3 and S4 are both basically diastolic sounds. That's the reason they are also heard after the S2 before S1. And ejection click is basically the early part of the systole. That is the reason it is heard immediately after the S1. And it is because of abrupt halting of the semilunar valves the moment systole begins is what we need to basically remember. Now, where do you listen these clicks, doctor? You listen the clicks in the base of the heart. Now you have a confusion. Am I listening the click because of the aortic valve or is it because of the pulmonary valve? Stenosis, where is causing this click? It's very simple. Typically aortic ejection click is a loud, high frequency sound, does not vary with respiration. Whereas pulmonary click is the one which varies with the expiration, is what we need to basically remember. So why do you listen aortic click at all, doctor? It is because of the sudden halting of the valve when the systole is happening. So aortic stenosis, bicuspid aortic valve or any dilated aortic root. For example, I have got a syphilitic aortitis with dilated aortic root. You can listen the clicks. In fact, you can listen the clicks. The best place is syphilitic aortic regurgitation is the place where you can listen. But nowadays we don't have syphilitic aortic regurgitation that commonly available in our clinical medicine posting, right? Then coming to the pulmonary ejection click, it is also heard if there is any pulmonary stenosis or if there is a pulmonary hypertension or a dilated pulmonary trunk. But typically a pulmonary ejection click will diminish with inspiration and typically it is heard more with the expiration. So respiratory variation is what you see with the ejection click coming from the pulmonic valve pathology, unlike the aortic valve pathology, is what I like to underscore to all of you. And mid-systolic clicks are the ones which are heard because of the MVP and mitral regurgitation is what you need to finally conclude. Quickly summarize, doctor. S3, S4 opening snap are diastolic sounds and clicks are basically systolic sounds. And ejection clicks are in early part of systole, they can be because of aortic or pulmonary stenotic pathology. Mid-systolic click occurs because of the mitral valve prolapse with a mitral regurgitation which may be significant or may not be significant is what we have to finally remember. And pulmonary ejection click varies with respiration, diminishes with inspiration, unlike the aortic ejection click which is same both during the inspiration and expiration is what I like to finally conclude. So I am quite sure, doctor, the time you are investing is worthy enough because at the end of 12 papers of PGI last 6 years, 6 into 2 and nearly around 3000 questions at the end of revision of them, you must be sure to face any topic, but the best is without losing time, immediately you quickly review these topics. Last moment what is important, how do we know? Only by solving the recent questions, but that is not the right approach in April, May. That is the time where you have to be very sure to, you have a luxury of time there. So that's the reason this session is meant for getting the mileage and leverage with the help of old topics. False positive de Xylose test is typically used where? What is de Xylose test, doctor? We are testing malabsorption of the carbohydrate. Any pathology is there in small intestine, carbohydrate absorption is not happening properly. If you give de Xylose and later on check the serum value of de Xylose, orally you give and check the serum values, they become low if there is any pathology in the small intestine. So that is called Xylose test positivity, where low serum values in spite of taking good amount of Xylose. What are the other conditions where though the intestine malabsorption is not there, still there can be a false positive Xylose test to happen? Suppose if there is a blind loop syndrome, what can happen? Blind loop syndrome has a lot of organisms growing in that blind loop which will eat all your Xylose, preventing its absorption. That also can cause a Xylose positivity. Hence, a false positivity can be there with the blind loop syndrome. Similarly, the Xylose need to be excreted into the urine. So there is a reason renal failure or even presence of ascites with bowel wall edema, any of them can lead to a false positive de Xylose test is what I like to underscore to all of you. Now why splitting of S2? Narrow splitting of it, paradoxical splitting of it. We have to be very sure about S1, S2 because one question invariably comes. Now what is splitting of S2, doctor? First what do you listen between aortic and pulmonary valve? Aortic first, then listen the pulmonary valve. Why it means? Either aorta went home early or pulmonary valve got delayed. That lead to wide splitting. Now let us look into the various pathologies. Normally A2 and P2, A2 appears first and P2 later, and on inspiration the separation become a little wider. Why? Because inspiration, when you are inspiring air, negative intrathoracic pressure is there, that will suck the blood, because that negative pressure suck the blood into the major vessels IVC and SVC, and that will increase the venous return to the right heart, that will make the right ventricle filling to become little delayed, so pulmonary valve closure become delayed, and that is the reason P2 become delayed and the A2 P2 difference become widened with inspiration, which is a normal phenomena, is what need to be basically remembered. And typically in the expiratory phase what will happen? They both come closer to each other, so that is a normal phenomena. So typically if there is a widening of the split, there may be an early A2 or P2 got already very much delayed. What causes an early A2? First of all, what is A2, doctor? Closure of aortic valve. When will aortic valve will close its shock? After all the customers have gone home, right? So the left ventricular blood has been totally pumped into the aorta, then the pressure inside the left ventricle become lower than that of aortic root, and that will close the aortic valve. Suppose if there is a mitral regurgitation, what will happen? When the left ventricle is pumping, some blood is going front, some blood is going back, so that in a shorter time only left ventricle became empty, and that will close the aortic valve faster. So that is the reason, doctor, mitral regurgitation or ventricular septal defect will cause the run out of the blood in a backward direction or a lateral side and make the ventricle to close early, and that makes the aortic valve to close early, and that makes the A2 P2 difference to become widened, is what need to be remembered. Now why there will be a delayed P2? Suppose if the right bundle branch block is there, telephonic communication is coming to the right ventricle through the Purkinje fibers little late, so it starts slowly to contract. So also P2 become little delayed to close right ventricle. So this delay of the right ventricular onset of the contraction due to the right bundle branch block causing a delay in the closure of the P2 leads to development to the widening of the A2 P2 difference, is what need to be remembered. Similarly, if the pulmonic stenosis is there, what will happen? The right ventricle has to pump against a narrow wall, stampede is there, it takes longer time for the P2 to close. Then what about the atrial septal defect, what will happen? Atria is sitting in the first floor, ventricle is sitting in the ground floor, right? So if there is a atrial septal defect, what will happen? From the left atrium blood will go into the right atrium. So right atrium is receiving the regular venous return, and also this unnecessary unwanted pregnancy like right atrial venous blood also will come, and that will make all that excess blood to go into the right ventricle, and right ventricle has too much of homework, regular venous return and left sided atrial blood, so the pulmonic valve become delayed to become closed. So that is the reason ASD also will lead, especially if there is a left to right shunt, for the widening of the A2 P2 difference to happen. Similarly, any ventricular failure of the right side with a prolonged right ventricular contraction also can lead to development of delayed P2. Can you tell me an example where right ventricular failure isolated way can fail? Suppose if I have pulmonary hypertension, pulmonary thromboembolism with high pulmonary pressures, that can make my right ventricular load to increase and right ventricle can fail, acute cor pulmonale if it is there. Then a failed ventricle right side will take a longer time to push the blood out of it and a longer time for the P2 to close, and that also will make A2 P2 become widened. So that's the reason, doctor, RBBB, pulmonary stenosis, atrial septal defect, prolonged right ventricular contraction cause a delay of the P2, whereas the counterpart VSD and MR will cause an early A2. Whether it is VSD or ASD, finally there is a widening of A2 P2 gap, but the cause is different. In VSD it is the early A2, it is the, in ASD it is the delayed P2 which is responsible for the widening, is what I like to underscore. What is another common question asked in the exam? single S2 is there. That means what? Either A2 got delayed or P2 became early, so that they both came to the same place, and it is opposite to that of widening. It is a narrowing. So what makes it to happen? If there is any calcified aortic stenotic valve, just like pulmonary stenosis causes widening by delaying the P2, a calcified aortic stenosis valve will cause a delay of the A2, and that also can make them to merge together to become a single S2. Similarly, pulmonary stenosis, if it is there, the classical example of any pulmonary stenosis, single S2 will be found. Similarly, Fanous tetralogy, also single S2 is a characteristic feature. Then Epstein's anomaly is another important entity where there can be development of a single S2. Now tell me, doctor, why in Epstein's anomaly you have a single S2? Basically in Epstein's, what is the problem? Tricuspid valve is abnormally placed and it is also stenotic. So amount of the blood going into the right ventricle is less, and that makes the right ventricle to close faster, and that is how the A2 P2 come together, and that becomes a single S2. Even in the case of a pathology in the tricuspid valve like an Epstein's anomaly is what need to be remembered. Similarly, obesity, pulmonary emphysema, why? Cause is not cardiac. The cause is you are unable to listen the pulmonic sound because of too much of an obesity, etc. Of course, if emphysema has led to the development of pulmonary hypertension, and pulmonary hypertension led to right ventricular failure, what will happen? There is a widening of the A2P2. But otherwise, as such, obesity, pulmonary emphysema like states, you can't listen the P2 clearly, so that can lead to development of a single S2 is what I like to underscore to all of you. Now what causes a reversed S2? That means aortic valve got so delayed, P2 became so early that in fact P2 is heard before that of the A2. When do you basically listen it? But how do you recognize the reversed split of the S2, doctor? Very simple. Normally during inspiration you hear the widening, and expiration you hear single S2. The reverse happens here. That is on expiration the A2 becomes so delayed that it occurs after the P2, and inspiration will cause P2 to become delayed and the split to be lost. So split which is heard, normally when is the split heard? During inspiration, and it will be lost in expiration. But here if with a reverse split, what will happen? Split will be heard in the expiration and it becomes single in the inspiration. So that is called paradoxic split of the S2 is what need to be remembered. Now what causes the A2 to become late to the office? It is the left bundle branch block. Just like pulmonary hypertension causes P2 delayed, systolic hypertension can cause A2 become delayed. Similarly, if there is severe aortic stenosis, patent ductus arteriosus, left heart failure, all of them can make the A2 to become delayed is what I like to underscore. Now is there any rhythm disturbance of the heart where typically a early P2 can occur, and that can lead to development of this kind of paradoxic split? Wolff-Parkinson-White syndrome. Normally AV node will lead to delay of the conduction of the electrical impulses from the SCA node into the ventricle. AV node causes a delay. In Wolff-Parkinson-White, what is happening? There is an abnormal path connecting the right atrium to right ventricle, which is called the type B type of WPW. Without any AV delay, this abnormal path connecting right atrium to right ventricle brings the conduction to the right ventricle faster. That makes the P2 to close early, and that can also lead to development of a reversing of the split of the S2 is what need to be remembered. So anyway, if you know A2 is fast, P2 is late, you can remember all this and can correlate in the exam. That is the best way of doing it. Then loud second heart sound. When do you listen? Loud P2 with a palpable P2 in the second intercostal space on the left side is typically seen with pulmonary hypertension. Same time, what else do you come across in inspection in pulmonary hypertension, doctor? Parasternal heave also will be there along with a loud palpable P2. Nothing stops you to diagnose the presence of pulmonary hypertension. Let us say you have a patient of MS, mitral stenosis, who has developed pulmonary hypertension, loud P2 with PSH will be found. So a loud A2 can occur in systemic hypertension, loud P2 in the case of the pulmonary hypertension. Similarly, a loud P2 can occur in the ASD even without pulmonary hypertension also. That is very important. Why in ASD you listen a loud P2? In ASD, left atrial blood is going to right atrium. Right atrium is receiving the regular venous return and also left atrial blood, and finally all that overload is falling on the left ventricle and right ventricle, and all that overload is passing through the pulmonary valve, and that makes the sound of the P2 to become louder, which is because of the overflow of the blood across the pulmonary valve. So a loud sound can be heard because of two reasons at the level of the valve. It can be because of an overflow of the blood across the valve can be responsible. Second is any obstruction to the outflow also can be responsible, is what you have to basically remember. Similarly, thin chested individuals also loud P2 can be there, is a very important finding. Now let us say you are not able to listen the A2. What is the cause? Why you are not able to listen? Elderly people, aortic stenosis is there, but it got calcified. A calcific valve cannot make loud sounds. Similarly, mitral valve also. Normally if there is a mitral stenosis, what happens to S1, doctor? Loud S1 will be heard. But if there is a coexistent mitral regurgitation along with mitral stenosis, or if there is any calcification of the mitral valve, what does it lead to? Softening of the S1. So calcification is one of the important reasons. Similarly, suppose if there is a lot of dilatation of the aortic root, that also will make the S2, A2 especially, to become softer. Similarly, a severe amount of pulmonary stenosis also can make the P2 to become softer, is what you need to finally remember. So you are sure, doctor, S1, S2 abnormalities and S3, S4 and clicks, where do you listen? That is all cardiology. Cardiology is 10 minutes to revise. If you know where is right hand, left hand, aortic valve, pulmonary valve, that's more than enough. Now let us go to the next question. Rhabdomyolysis with the hemoglobinuria, where do you come across? Does rhabdomyolysis lead to renal failure, doctor? Very much. But always it does not lead to hemoglobinuria. Then typically, if there is any heat stroke, let us say, or malignant hypothermia if it is there, then lot of degeneration of the muscle is there, that leads to rhabdomyolysis, but it can't lead to any hemoglobinuria. Hemoglobinuria is a sign of intravascular hemolysis. How do you differentiate extravascular from intravascular hemolysis? Hemoglobinuria is a feature of intravascular, splenomegaly, etc. are more often a feature in the case of the extravascular hemolysis. Now, it is the hornet string which can cause both rhabdomyolysis and also intravascular hemolysis, leading to the development of hemoglobinuria, is what I like to underscore to all of you. Now let us talk about the chancroid, syphilis and the lymphogranuloma venereum. These four major gurus of STD, without that there is no paper at all, doctor. So chancroid, painful ulcer, bubo formation, painful inguinal lymphadenopathy, everything painful, especially with this fellow called Haemophilus. And in chancroid there are also fever, chills and malaise. Incubation period is between 1 day to 2 weeks, after which there is a small bump which become ulcerated, which is painful, is a classical feature. So syphilis, herpes, chancroid, LGV, donovanosis. Without revising them, no paper is still, we are not doing a complete job. So typically papule is a feature of syphilis, vesicle in herpes, pustule in chancroid is a very important and distinct feature. And also incubation period, somehow we have to cram the numbers. 9 to 90 days syphilis, 2 to 7 days is herpes, 1 to 14 days, that is 2 weeks in chancroid, 3 days to 6 weeks in LGV, 1 to 4 weeks in donovanosis. Edges are very important, doctor, ulcer edges, another differentiating factor. Sharply demarcated, elevated, round and oval is syphilis. And you must have seen the herpetic ulcers, erythematous they will be typically. And undermined edges will be found in chancroid, and elevated and round oval in LGV, and elevated irregular in the case of donovanosis. Based on the description only we have to basically identify which STD does it belong to. Then induration also is a very important feature. It is a typical firm indurated ulcer in case of syphilis, whereas soft in the case of the chancroid. That is the fundamental differentiating feature between the two. Then the other important thing is the lymphadenopathy is another common way by which they ask the question. Syphilis is firm non-tender bilateral, whereas firm tender bilateral is herpes, tender once more in chancroid, and suppurated loculated unilateral in LGV, and pseudobubos are what you come across in donovanosis. You must be doubly sure about. Now let's go to the next question. HBV. So serology of HBV, without that there is no paper. So hepatitis B envelope antigen, HBV DNA, DNA polymerase, all of them are the important indicators. Now which amyloidosis lead to development of transthyretin elevation, and what are the differences between one type of systemic amyloidosis from other? I think recent November 2007 AIIMS paper also we were talking about cardiac amyloidosis. Let us talk about that in context of PGI November 2006. So basically amyloidosis can cause a problem in conduction system with the AV nodal block. Heart blocks can be a feature. Cardiomyopathy, which type? Not hypertrophic. Restrictive cardiomyopathy what you come across. ECG shows characteristically low QRS voltages, a very important distinctive feature of the cardiac amyloidosis. If you do the echocardiography, thickening of the LV valve will be there, wall will be there, even valvular involvement will be there, and a decreased systolic contraction with a restrictive type of cardiomyopathic features will be there, and it can be part of a heredofamilial amyloidosis is what I like to underscore to all of you. Now, cardiac involvement, does it talk anything about prognosis? Definitely. Heart problem is a bad problem. So that is what layman also thinks, right? So let us think like layman. It portends a poor prognosis in the case of amyloidosis is what I like to underscore. Now this is a typical ECG in a patient with a cardiac amyloidosis. Suppose can you use this for teaching your junior the ECG? Very difficult. Small voltages are there. So low voltage ECG is a very classical feature. Another important feature of cardiac amyloidosis, it is called a pseudo infarction pattern. If you look at ECG, it looks like a acute MI with a ST segment elevation, but it is not that. So pseudo infarction pattern can sometimes mislead the clinician. So here you can be able to see that the voltages are typically smaller, and if you basically ask it to comment about the lead V1 and the V2, the typical morphology makes you to think of an infarction, but it is not so, pseudo infarction. Similarly, echocardiogram, if you take doctor, it is very important. You have to differentiate whether it is cardiac amyloidosis or whether it is an ischemic heart disease. There is a concentric thickening of the ventricular wall and the septum will be there. Abnormal ventricular relaxation with a diastolic dysfunction with a restrictive hemodynamics. They are more characteristic in case of cardiac amyloidosis. A speckled appearance of the myocardium on the echocardiogram is another important feature that need to be remembered. Now let us talk about gluten hypersensitivity syndrome. Now what need to be avoided, doctor? Rye, wheat, barley, oats. They are the ones which need to be strictly avoided if there is any gluten sensitivity. Acalculous cholecystitis. Another common question, common topic in entrance, AIIMS or any question bank. Where do you come across? All of you know, stone leading to cholecystitis is calculus. What causes a calculus? Before that I give you a short case presentation. 72-year-old female, colicky right abdominal pain, but is it the common age group even for the regular gallstones with a calculus cholecystitis? No, 40 female fertile is what you see in case of the calculus cholecystitis. This is a calculus. Pain and vomiting is there, low grade fever, right upper quadrant tenderness is there, WBC count shows 14,000 is the TLC, and ultrasound was taken, it shows a echogenic sludge in a moderately dilated gallbladder, and there are no discrete gallstones which are visible, they are not seen. And also you can see the gallbladder wall which is typically thickened, and there is no biliary duct dilatation which can be seen here. And when there is an acute cholecystitis, what is the best radionuclide scan, doctor? HIDA and PIPIDA. They are the two imidoacetic acid radionuclide scans that we take. When the technetium 99M IDA scan had been taken, you can see that typically her common bile duct can be visualized, and also you are able to visualize the bowel also. But what happened to the gallbladder? It could not be visualized. Non-visualization of the gallbladder on a HIDA scan is an indication of the presence of any cholecystitis. Acute cholecystitis is a very important investigation. So typically this is a case of a calculous cholecystitis. If you are fasting, any chronic infection like malaria, typhoid, etc., is there. And if there is an ischemia, in all such scenarios there can be an echogenic sludge without any definite calculus, is called the acalculous cholecystitis, is what need to be remembered. Right-sided colonic cancer differs from left-sided colon cancer in its clinical presentation, all of you know very well. The right-sided cancers towards cecum, etc., they present more larger and more likely to bleed and lead to development of anemia as a presentation. Whereas the left-sided are smaller and more often cicatrizing, stenosing and obstructing in nature, the fundamental difference between the two.